Friends, welcome to our next episode of the Reach More podcast. In our last episode, we interviewed Josh and Aaron Regal to talk about their personal apostolates, the way that they have used their Reach More training to go out and share Jesus with the world. And so in this episode, Madi and I are going to talk about some of the things that really stood out to us from that conversation that we think are applicable for everybody. So you might not be a married couple, might not be in nursing or sales, but these are things that they're doing that we thought would be helpful for all of us. So
Mhm.
what do you think, Mai?
Yeah, it was awesome. I always first of all, I love hearing how like married couples that do it together. I always say when I do the consulting and we kind of figure out like, oh, who's going to be in the group. I always think it's fun to have at least like one married couple, just because there's just some different opportunities that you could take the conversation to the next level, like they talked about, right? Like doing the prayer companion and just being like, hey, what did this do? Or what did that do? Or there's a session 4 or it's all about conversation, and there's an exercise in noticing, and you have to like answer, do you know this about like this person, someone that's really important in your life? And I always say if it's a married couple, like try answering all these questions about each other. So it's like, do you know their greatest fears? Do you know their dreams? Do you know their gifts? Do you know all these different things? And so I really loved seeing how they were able to say, hey, this actually helped us to get closer together and to bring up conversations. And uh I loved to she was like, we started dating in COVID, and just being able to see like this is how he is in a social setting and with other people. And just I think it was awesome to just see the natural progression of how reach more is not only beneficial for ourselves and our own hearts, but for the people that we are surrounded ourselves with. So whether you do it with your spouse or not, your spouse should still be impacted and brought in. Whether you are not married, like you could still do this with your best friend, you can still do this with your coworkers, you can still do this with your family members. And that's what we heard throughout the whole conversations of like they mentioned coworkers, they mentioned family, they mentioned all these things. And I'm like, that's the purpose of all this, right? How to apply these things in our everyday life with the people in our lives, the people that are in our circle of influence. So I really just love that aspect.
Yeah, that I was so happy to hear them describe what it was like going through Reach More training together. And this
Mhm.
just popped into my mind right now. Let's say you're not married to somebody, so you're listening to this and you're like, "Well, I'm not married. Maybe I shouldn't do Reach More training." I've got
I'm
to
not
believe
married.
that the people who participate in it develop really deep friendships,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
those are meaningful and sustaining in life. One of the things that I loved about what Josh said was he talked about that the new car theory
That
that
was
when
that was
you
so accurate.
yeah, and so that in case you missed it, what he said was, when you let's say you buy a new car, all of a sudden you see that car everywhere, right? You notice all of the other people driving it in the parking lots and in advertisements on TV, that kind of thing. And you saw the same number of those cars before. It's just now you're aware of it. You're looking for
Mhm.
it. And
Mhm.
that's probably a little bit of what happens when you learn anything, right? Like, if, my guess is
Mhm.
if you're a geologist, you walk around and you're looking at, it's like, oh my gosh, look at that rock that was formed like 75 billion years ago. And this, like, but I see by your look that's you maybe not be that interested in geology.
I have
um,
zero
I'm
knowledge of
not either. I just
rats.
I just made that up. Um,
Sedimentary.
but with evangelization,
Mhm.
if you don't have any skills in that area, right? You're not confident in it, and you haven't developed
Mhm.
like how to share your story, how to listen and develop deep relationships, then you're approaching almost like it's kind of like if you see this giant rock wall in the distance,
Mhm.
right? And you're
Mhm.
like, well, I don't know how to get up that at all. Well, a skilled climber, they're going to get close and they're going to see, okay, here's a
Mhm.
handhold, here's a foothold, here's a
Mhm.
chimney, here's the things
Mhm.
I can do. And that's
Mhm.
what learning about evangelization does. It helps you
Mhm.
see things that you didn't see before, so that
Yeah.
now you can identify, here's where I start, right? Here's the start
Mhm.
of this relationship. Here's just how I be friends with this person. And I'll keep going back to that throughout the show, that
Yeah.
evangelization is being friends with people in an
Yep.
authentic way. It's not
That's
done
it.
to do anything other than be an authentic, good friend with that human being.
Well, that's what it should be, right? Because I mean, again, we know the definition of evangelization is good newsization, like being able to spread the gospel and the good news. And when I'm excited about something, like I want to share with my friends and I want to share with my family. And so if you're learning something, whatever it is, you should be willing and excited to share with your friends and family. And it shouldn't be this thing that's so heavy, but I understand why so many people are so hesitant. Like I get it is what I'm trying to say, but it shouldn't be that way. And I think the more you actually dive into it, the less intimidating it is, and that's what he was talking about. He's like, it's not as intimidating as I thought. Yeah, no, it's not because it's just, hey, how are you?
Yeah, and
Like,
it's probably very easy to make it something in your mind that's much bigger than it actually is. Like
hmm
when Aaron said that nobody was apparently offended when she invited them. And I think
hmm
sometimes we psych ourselves out and think, well, I'm not going to ask because I don't want them to be mad at me. It's like
hmm
they're probably not going to be. Like
hmm
you invited them to something that you think is of value. Even if they don't want to do it, I mean, it's probably going to be okay.
And I also like the hearing both perspective because Aaron was like, I shot out, a group text message and it worked for her. And then he was like, I did that and it did not work for me. So
Right, right.
also being able to say, okay, you know what? Like, who are the individuals that I'm inviting? Who would respond better? Because for me, my personality and the way that I am, I probably wouldn't do a group message. I'd probably do a phone. Text messages are they get so lost in translation for me. I just don't, I'm not a texter. So I just call them up and be like, oh, hey, like I'm doing this thing. I'm really excited about it. Like, would you maybe be interested? So even like the delivery, but I also think there are some of my friends that wouldn't respond to the phone and I would need to do texting. So, kind of thinking about who are the individuals that I'm inviting and what is the best way for me to reach out to them. And so he was like, family trap, not for him, but worked for her. And so being able to say, okay, let's even pray about what's best and see the best way to invite each individual, knowing that each individual is different and is going to respond differently.
What I think is really funny about that is that you texted me this morning and I didn't respond, and then you had to
Mhm.
call me to get me the
Yeah. See,
answer.
so I'm
So there's
learning about Dan as well. So what is the best way to communicate with Dan?
I think I am usually good with either. It just so happened that I was in one of those moods where I was like, I don't need to have my phone at my hip,
Yeah.
that like
Yeah.
all day today. But no,
That's
that was
so
good to recognize like some people are going to respond to text, others phone call, others
mhm.
personal invitation, and there's probably even like a culture of group chats, which is a funny thing to say. I swear I've never said
Yeah.
those words before, but
No, but there
and
is.
yeah, so if you've got a family group chat, it's going to take on its own style, and there's going to be things that are normal for you to talk about, like sports is probably one thing, um, and then others that are less normal or less almost like taboo for you to talk
Mhm.
about. And not to say
Yes.
that you can't break taboos, but if that's there, then just find another way.
No,
Kind of,
but that's
it's
so accurate. My family we use WhatsApp obviously because a bunch of my family's in Dominican Republic, and every chat, I think I'm in like 6 different family chats, and everyone is like a different purpose, but people have been kicked out for certain things, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh." Like,
wow.
things to not like, it's just, you just gotta read the room and you gotta figure it out. But yeah, it's true. There is a characteristic to all group chats.
One of the things that I noticed is they're both involved in something, but it was almost as if, um, like the Aaron was leading a study for Lent, like a kind of a Lenten prayer routine, and Josh is leading a men's group, and neither of those things seems to them as this great Herculean effort of evangelization.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
was kind of at least this is my perception of it. It was a little smaller and simpler,
Mhm.
but that's no less like important and essential. And that's kind of the big idea behind this is um, you don't have to do something massive. Like
Mhm.
you can do something smaller
Well,
because that's
I was excited to hear about, I mean, nurses for me always hold a special place in my heart. My whole childhood was spent in a hospital, so the nurses were the ones that got me through. And just hearing her be like, "Yeah, I'm praying with my patients," and I remember there's been about 2 or 3 times that a nurse has been that bold, and it was like the amount of peace that it brought to me as a patient. So to hear her be so bold and like, "This is what I'm doing," I was like, "That is apostolate," right? Like, that's a
yeah.
part of the apostolate. This is a part of what we're talking about. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, weekly meetings. She's bringing it into her daily walk in her work, and that is awesome, right? Like, I love just hearing that aspect, and when she was, like, mentioning, she's like, "The apostolates had to change a few times." I was like, "Yes, that's how it works, right? Apostolates change sometimes, and sometimes you're doing things and it's working great, and sometimes you're doing things and it's taken its course, and so you got to pray about what else is the Lord calling you to do. But you see, with her husband, he's been doing a men group pretty consistently. And so he even tried to increase, and then they were like, "Psych," right? So just the openness and the flexibility, and just because some things are changing doesn't mean that you're failing. It just means that the group is shifting, or that the Lord is inviting you to invite other people or to do something else.
Yeah, I want to go back to that for a second. That how important it is to be okay with your apostolate shifting and not to
Mhm,
get too tied up in what you
mhm,
think it needs to look like. Um,
mhm.
because how many times does a ministry go on longer or an apostolate go on longer than it needs to because someone's not willing to let it go? And so it
Mhm,
continues taking up space.
mhm,
And I think the way you know that's approaching is if there's a staleness, right? If
mhm.
there's a lack of growth, a lack of fruit, and then and it's not to say that that's bad, right? Like it could just be things existed for a
Right.
season. Like
Yep.
I remember when I went to grad school, my wife and I both moved up to Boston, and most of my peers in the program were single. And so
Mhm.
there was this like thriving single community at the school that I never did anything with because I was
Yeah.
married, right? And
Mhm.
that like what they were involved in was important for them at that time. But for me, it wasn't. And I knew what I was supposed to be doing. And I'm really grateful that I had that clarity.
Mhm.
And again, like then I left Boston and my season as a grad student was over, and some of the things that I was, the way I was spending my time learning, like, okay, I didn't have time for that anymore. And
Yeah.
that's a part of the rhythm of life, and that's a part of the rhythm of evangelization as well. And I think you can see
Mhm.
that in the life of St. Paul throughout
Mhm.
the entire New Testament.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um, Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that that's awesome. That it's a good thing to recognize and to see. And I think sometimes we cling so hard because we think like, if this ends, I have failed, or like I have failed God, or like I'm not good enough,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that is so not accurate. And it's
no,
actually something that we talk about in the Reach More like videos. Like, it could be for a season, it could be for transition time. Like it doesn't, like, be okay with the shifting and be okay with the changes. To just see, okay, Lord, like, who do you want me to walk with? I think that's the main question. Lord, who do you want me to walk with? Um, and sometimes it's going to be in group settings, and sometimes it's going to be inviting that coworker out for coffee. So it's just like, what do
yeah,
you want, Lord? What do you want?
yeah. Well, the I'm so happy for Josh and Aaron that they really haven't had any terrible failures. Um,
Hmm.
Josh, I think the failure Josh said was that he tried starting a running group and then his knee got hurt. I wouldn't call that. It's definitely not like a he
Poor
didn't.
guy.
Oh yeah, yeah, but he didn't. It was also winter though, so maybe it was one of those like blessings in disguise. It was like, hey, you're not
That's
going to be
true.
running outside in Akron in December and
I'm
January.
not gonna lie, when he said, "Oh, well, I couldn't do, like, winter running season," in my head, I was like, "Why would you leave your house during winter?" Like, I don't understand. Like, I was trying to, like, I was like, This is not computing in my mind at all, but
Yeah,
go for it, bud." Like,
yeah.
I don't
So, Marty, the
yeah,
way I think I've tried to understand that is there are people who say Florida's too hot, right?
I don't
And but the response is, so of all people, the Swedes have this figured out. So they say there's no such thing as bad weather, only
because they
inappropriate clothing.
ah,
And so
yeah.
if you can dress for it, you can be in any weather.
I hear that, it just doesn't compute in my mind, right? Like, if it's snowing, Wh what oh, how do you run? Like,
Yeah,
I don't see it. I don't get it.
they make running
I
snowshoes. And I'm
I
gonna
don't
edit in this
nope,
episode,
nope,
I'm gonna put in a
nope, but
picture
then
of
there's my
maybe a little
face.
video.
Like, I feel like I'd have to be, like, one of those people that have, like, everything covered, just, like, the whole everything, my whole b like, just everything, like a face mask.
You're allowed
I
to
don't
do
know.
that.
I just
Yeah.
not for me. I'll stick to Miami, thank you very
Okay.
much.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, there's people who feel the same way about Miami. They're like, "Oh my gosh, it's so hot. Like I
It
die
is,
with
it's
the
sticky and
humidity."
it's hard and yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I get it,
but
I
and
get
you
it.
just get used to it, right? Like
That's
you
true.
get used to it. So,
That's true.
um,
Adaptation.
but even in that, even in he had a plan, right? He
Mhm.
hoped that it would work and it didn't. And I think that's the lesson is when you let's say you propose something to God, you think it's the way to go, right?
Mhm.
If he wants you to stop, he will let you know. right? And I'm not
Mhm.
saying that like God hurt Jason's, or I'm sorry, not Jason. I'm not saying that God hurt his knee to make him not
Yeah.
able to run anymore. But
Yeah, no.
instead, I mean, that's one of those things like, okay, Lord, I'm obviously not supposed to do this right now. Okay,
Mhm.
there's something else for you to do.
Mhm.
There's always something.
Yeah.
So don't be
Yeah, for
discouraged.
sure. Amen.
Well, I think that's a good wrap up for this one.
Great. I'm
Peace be with
excited.
you, everybody. Have a wonderful day, week,
We
month,
will talk
wherever,
soon.
whenever this is.
In
Indeed.
whatever weather you are, the Lord sees you.
And loves you. Peace, everybody. Bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed our discussion of the takeaways from our interview with Josh and Aaron. And going forth, I hope that you found something that you can apply to your own life. And I want to say, both reverently and really with a lot of excitement, encourage you, if you haven't already started some type of apostolate, like a real way of reaching out to people. I would encourage you, don't let the sun go down today without asking God to show you what it is that you can do. And even if you just have the slightest hint of an idea, start doing that. And whether or not that's actually the thing that God wants you to do, I'm very, very certain that when we're generous with God and we're bold, then He is going to show us where to go. He's going to steer the ship. But God can't steer a parked car. We've got to put our foot on the gas, even if it's just a little bit. So spend some time today and ask God to show you how are you supposed to befriend people? How are you supposed to share who Jesus is with them? And I know we all have a lot going on. We're all busy, and there's probably a lot of difficult things going on in your life. And I want to be really respectful of that. And I also, at the same time, just want to remind all of us that sharing the good news is life-giving for us and for other people. And I don't want anyone to miss out on that. I don't want you to miss out on that. And I don't want the people in your life to miss out on that. So count on my prayers for you as you discern the next step that God is asking you to take so that you can reach more. God bless you, friends. Bye.